Hey guys, so let's talk a little bit about providers and my experiences working with really large systems. And I'll just define a really large, like what I call a really large system. There are absolutely larger systems. If you're talking about something like at the scale of Google, and Facebook, they play in their own league for the most part. Like these are the companies who invent the tools that other companies, even really large companies, use in order to run their stuff. Like we at my company, we use Kubernetes and Docker and so forth, and these tools are developed by these types of really large organizations. So they have a very unique case. You never ever rather use this as a rule of thumb. If Google is saying that they're using something, make sure that you need some experience to do this, because I have been burned so many times by assuming that what's right for Google is right for me. Trust me, it's not. It is not. If they are saying that, hey, you should be doing this and this and that, and that, you need to have you need to take a step back and really ask yourself, what am I gaining and what is it going to cost me? Because what's right for Google is not necessarily right for me. And that's just a really good rule of thumb. Remember who is giving you advice. If the person giving you advice is like leaps and bounds ahead of you, they might be talking about what's right they might just forget to tell you that, hey, this advice that I'm giving you, it's for when you have like 1,000 people working at your company, or 14,000 or 50,000 people. It's not for when there's just like 2 people or just you. So just keep that in mind. So let's compare some stuff. So I have spent quite some time working with Amazon AWS, and I've worked with Google. I work on a daily basis with Google Cloud Platform. I'm not an expert in any way. This is an entire job in of itself, and basically, apart from that, I did a little bit of Azure, and I don't know much about Azure Cloud, but the one thing I can tell you is that Azure Cloud right now is the cheapest cloud provider, as far as I know, in terms of what it costs you to run your stuff. And if we then look at Amazon, Amazon is one of the oldest, if not the oldest provider out there. They're probably the most established one. And I would say that most of the really large, like the really large companies, use Amazon because they really have this down. Like Amazon is really good at infrastructure, I have to say. I don't really like their interface, like the user experience and like their platform isn't all that nice. They're not so much, in my opinion, as much into UX as Google. Like Google Cloud Platform is like beautiful, like the interfaces are beautiful, and a lot of the stuff they have is really great. But Google is unfortunately a little bit behind from my perspective. And I love Google. It is absolutely my favorite company in the IT world. But when it comes to they have some ways to go before they're up there rivaling with Amazon, because they're more expensive in general on their services, and they have some issues with large data queries and stuff of that nature. There are better people to tell you exactly all of the things that are like the main differences, but what I'm basically here to tell you is to give you the perspective of how it is to work with these providers and which one you should pick and so forth. So I would tell you this: if you are starting your own system, if you are just starting out, let's say that you haven't even built your app, you're starting right here today, and you don't have any investors, it's just you or maybe you and some friends, then do the bare minimum. Like start because infrastructure is something that you should grow into. It's not something you should start with right off the bat. Think of it as building in a small town. You always start by building a small road so that it's a perfect fit for that town. You don't start by building a super highway, because Amazon and Google Cloud, these are super highways. These are the biggest, it's the pinnacle of running things at scale right now. And for like a company where I'm like which, you know, for me and my colleagues, like we have hundreds of thousands of users and so, you know, millions of requests. Like we have the type of like the threshold that is required in order to need all of this. We need the logging, we need all these databases solutions, and we need the ability to deploy different instances and these pipelines and all this overhead work. And I want you to put, like, just hear me, put this in context. We are roughly 8 to 10 developers who are working full time. When you have that size, these solutions are right for you. If it's just you, stick with something like Heroku, or start looking to something like Firebase, for example. Like something serverless is a really good way to get started with these things, and you can then transition into what you need. I use personally, I mean, for my little project, I have my own startup where we don't have this type. It's just me and a few other guys. We use serverless because we don't need all the complexity that comes with having a cloud solution. Because what you should know is that you get a lot of power, but with a lot of power comes a lot of complexity as well. Google Cloud is really great, I love it, but it's also not something that you learn in an afternoon. It will take you a lot of time to learn this thing. I actually argue that the best thing for you, if you want to get really good at operations and running things at scale, it is very important that you learn from a already really large system. Because unfortunately, there are no textbooks for this type of thing. The best thing you can do is to talk to people who are already running things at scale and getting their, you know, opinions about how to structure things. What I did is actually exactly what I'm doing now. I work at companies. I try to find companies where they have a DevOps culture. Basically, the developers are in charge of running everything. They run the whole show, and that means that I get to learn these things. I'm not an expert, but I get to learn as I go along. And usually there's a more senior person here who has been doing it for a longer time. But trust me, very few people can today claim that they're experts in Amazon and infrastructure and so forth, because it's such a very, very broad topic. So that's basically, to summarize what I'm saying to you, is that if you are right now just building your first web application or your first whatever, look into either Firebase or serverless. Amazon's Lambda functions are really good. They're very cheap. It's very easy to get started. They're very different. Like I might have to make a separate video on exactly how these things work, because these are a fairly new and trendy concept. I can only say from experience that it's very useful, and I think it's a really great start for, you know, if you just want to get things done very quickly. And if you're more into like traditional web server, like traditional application development, you should look into something like OpenShift, or, you know, I've used OpenShift for some projects. I prefer Heroku because they have, like, I really like it. And you know, just start there, and then I'll gladly, you know, if you have any requests or so forth, I'll gladly show you everything from Kubernetes to Docker to Google Cloud, and like how all these things works. But you should know that it will take a lot of time, and it's I'm just warning you a little bit. I'm not scary. I'm not trying to scare you away from it, because it's great technology. It's great fun. But even if you today, with your small little application, deploy it to the Google Cloud, odds are that you won't get the full picture, because you don't have the scale that is required to really fully need all the things that are in these really large solutions. So here's my rule of thumb for you when you know when you should move from step 1 to step 2. Think of it as, you know, starting to work out. You don't start putting on the heavy weights day 1. You transition into the heavy weights. You progress to the heavy weights. So if you have no users, your first app idea, start with something like Heroku or serverless, because it's going to give you the most important thing you can have at small scale, and that's speed. Development speed is everything when you are just starting out, because a system that doesn't work or doesn't provide value is not worth anything to anybody. It doesn't matter if you have the biggest, most advanced super infrastructure in the world if nobody's using your system. The second thing you do is that you stay on that for as long as possible, and when you number your users in the thousands, if you have several thousands of users, that's when you go to Google Cloud. That's when these things start to really, really matter. When the system basically become, I like to think of it, when the system is so large and complex that that you can't have a single person keep the whole thing in their head, then you should start thinking about moving to the next step. Hopefully this was useful to you, and hopefully you have a great day.